Hello, I'm Toby Earle. I'm a journalist. But more importantly right now, I'm thrilled to be the moderator for this first session with Lewis Arnold. Welcome to the RTS Student Masterclass. And welcome to you, Lewis, to the RTS Student Masterclass. Lewis is a BAFTA award-winning director. And I need this, you see, because he's done so much. I have to get it all correct. He graduated from the National Film and Television School in 2013. His graduation film got him an agent and a gig on the Channel 4 BAFTA-winning series Misfits. In 2014, he was a hotshot in Broadcast magazine. Since then, he has gone on to direct some of the most critically acclaimed, talked about and watched drama series in the country, including Broadchurch, Des, Time and Sherwood. That is, as we say, not bad. Lewis, thank you for joining us today.
That
was immensely embarrassing. We haven't even got started. We will try and answer as many questions of yours as possible. Please have those brains cogitating as we talk. If you put your hand up, I'll try to come to as many of these questions as possible. We do only have a short time though, but we will endeavour to hear your questions as best as possible. But let's start with you, Lewis. Did you always want to be a director?
Yeah, from an early age, I robbed the idea off my best friend. So I used to make films with him when we were like 14, 15. And then for a long time, didn't know it was an industry I could get into. Where I'm from in Birmingham, and none of my family are in the industry. So it felt a kind of very alien profession, or a very unattainable career to have. So for a while, I was chasing the idea of being a graphic designer, because that felt much more attainable and something I thought I could do through studying. And then when I was at college studying to do that, I found a brochure to the University of Gloucestershire and found a sort of course in video production. And at the same time, I was kind of making skateboard and skip films. It was around the time of Jackass. So I was kind of making stupid videos with my friends. And then kind of sort of transferred that into going, do you know what, I could actually do this as a career, and sort of then started chasing that and went to university and studied video production, but went to the course knowing I wanted to direct. So I kind of directed every project I could.
It's not the most important thing, but did you direct those Jackass style videos, or did you actually put yourself through anything painful?
Yeah, both.
Right.
Yeah, I've got a back injury from one of the things.
Really?
Yeah.
What was that from?
Jumping out of a tree and landing on a rock, just something completely ridiculous. But
I mean, you pain for your art. That is a true artist.
I mean, the great thing about those videos was they were skateboard videos with a bit of sort of stupidity in them. But that's where I learned to edit. So editing was a thing that helped me move through, because at that point, you know, you're not working with creative people. I wasn't working with editors and cinematographers. You were kind of doing it all yourself, learning all yourself. So at a very early age was learning all the disciplines to be able to create the work.
Did you know anything about any of those disciplines you just mentioned before you started doing those very disciplines? Did you have any idea?
No, and now that sounds frightening, but I think youngsters, when you're young, you just do, don't you? You make things, you learn. And now, ironically, I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and you know, I would always not show things that weren't perfect, but the things that weren't perfect were the things I learned the most from. So I tried to carry that on as I got older and sort of not be afraid of where I failed and try and learn from the failure. But as a youngster now, you just did it. You just did it and learned from it. And yeah.
You mentioned going to college there and to pursue this ambition. How tricky is that financially speaking?
It was very different. I mean, I went to university in 2004, I think it was. So obviously, or did I graduate? Yeah, 2004 is when I went. So I did a foundation in art and design and then went to university. I was very privileged to go to university. And I say privileged because I think that, and I do a lot of teaching now, I go back to my old university and old film school. And when I went, there was lots of structures in place to allow anyone from any sort of working class background, any background, economically it was irrelevant. There were structures in place to support students so you weren't crippled with debt for the rest of your life. I think now the fees have gone up astronomically since I was there. I think when I was there, they went up stupidly, but we sort of weren't counted in that rise. So every time I go back to school now, because one of the great things about going to university back then was you were surrounded by people from all different walks of life. So I learned just as much about storytelling from my peers as I did the tutors. And I find that when I go back and teach now occasionally, at some sort of certain institutions where it's very expensive to go and there maybe aren't the scholarships or support in place, I find that when I'm doing or watching the work, there's a lot of similar themes, there's a lot of similar stories being told across the films. And I think some of that is because maybe there isn't a broader mix of kind of people from all walks of life influencing each other and exposing each other to different kinds of art forms. So for me, it was really important to go to university, but I'm aware now it's a different landscape now, and it's the same privileges might not exist to people from, you know, certain backgrounds because of, I think, rising cost in university fees.
I mean, as a director, does that disappoint you, upset you?
Hugely. I mean, I think, you know, I think education should be as free as it can. I think Scotland is a great example of how, you know, university and education can be free. It's not something maybe our government see as being a thing that they want to push because they don't have the same experiences as us. They probably all privately educated and their children are privately educated. They don't have the same concerns as us. But from a filmmaking point of view, absolutely. I mean, the good thing is, I think, from an artistic point of view, there are other ways now to learn your craft. You all have phones in your pockets. We didn't have that when I was around. So university was the only way to make films, or because you needed the facilities, you needed the kit. I think the good thing that's changed now is we've all got access to film on our phones. I mean, I don't use TikTok or know anything about TikTok, but you know, you can be making content via TikTok and YouTube and all these things. So I feel like the landscape has changed. So hopefully filmmakers from certain backgrounds aren't missing out because the technology is there now for those people to make content and still learn and be a part of it. Whereas when I went to university, the only way you could make was either having financial support from a screen agency or by going to a sort of institution like a university.
Yeah, so you mentioned the economic constraints which you faced, and also you mentioned that you came from a family where this wasn't a normal career. You know, this wasn't something that you had experience of, or had, you know, people you could perhaps turn to sort of discuss. Did you ever think about giving up while you were studying? Did you ever sort of think to yourself, am I doing the right thing? Is this too hard?
Always. I think you always if it was easy, everyone would do it. I think is the thing. I was really lucky that when I graduated from university, so ironically, my dad and my middle sister were really skeptical and they wanted me to do a career. I was very academic. I was a geek basically at whatever I did. So I was very academic. So it was very easy for my mum or my dad or my sisters to go, oh, you know, you could go and do this. And teachers would say he's very good at whatever, art, geography, whatever. Yeah, he could do this. It just wasn't where my heart lied. And it was only when I went to university and made my first film, like narrative film that wasn't skateboards and people being stupid, that my dad kind of went, oh, okay. And he kind of and now he's like my biggest fan. He comes to any screening we do. But it took a while for them to see, because they have no experience of this industry. And neither did I. It felt so alien to all of us. But when I graduated from university, I found a mentor in a writer called Jeff Thompson. And he was from Coventry, was a bouncer all his life, and then in his sort of 40s decided he wanted to write. Used to write as a doorman. He wrote a book called, oh God, now I'm going to get it wrong. He wrote a book called Bouncer, I think. Made a short film called Bouncer, which was directed by Michael Bag-Clifford. And that film won a BAFTA, or was BAFTA nominated with Ray Winston. And that was nominated for a BAFTA. And at this time, no one in the Midlands was winning BAFTAs or being nominated for BAFTAs. So he was a big influence on me. He was the first person that kind of really took me under their wing and sort of gave me advice and told me things like, he said, every day you're still doing it, and this stuck with me, every day you're still doing it, someone quit. So the longer you can keep doing it, the pool will get smaller. And as long as you keep working, grafting and honing your craft, you will eventually sort of find a way through. And that kind of stuck with me. And then the other thing that drove me personally was this inept fear of failing. I wanted to do this, like, it was the thing I wanted to do all my life. Well, not all my life, but from a sort of age where you have to start considering what you want to do with your life. And, you know, I feel like I sacrificed quite a lot along the way. And I really wanted to do it. And I was so scared that I would not do it, or that I would fail. That was the thing that kept motivating me, was I wouldn't not take an opportunity, even if it didn't feel right, because of a fear of that opportunity leading somewhere. So I kind of did everything and tried to basically, you know, absorb and take any opportunity that was available to me. And I think some of that is economic. You know, I took a few opportunities when I was younger, when I was in my mid-20s, that I wouldn't necessarily have took if I was financially secure. I took them for money, and actually those things ended up. So, for example, I became a first assistant director. So I was struggling financially. I made a short film, and our production coordinator on that film asked me to go and first a music video in London. And I was just like, I know nothing about first assistant directing. I can't do that. I don't want to do that. And he was like, well, I'll give you 100 quid for the day. And I was just like, I need that 100 quid. I was like, and I had a nice conversation with him. I said, what are you expecting from me? And he was like, look, just be on the schedule, help the director, and do what you know you need to do. Mm-hmm. And I did that, which I just wouldn't have done. I think if I got the financial security, I would not have taken that opportunity. And one of the runners on that job actually worked for the production company that we made the music video for. And about 2 days later, she called me to hire me again as a first assistant director. And within 2 weeks, I was on like a 100 grand Tiesto music video, first in a crew of 100, which was mad. I had no experience. And I used to think that what I used to do early in the days of firsting was be very, very brummy and very, very loud. That's how I got things done. And then you realize very quickly you don't need to do that. But that opportunity, and that the firsting meant I'd firsted for years as well as directing. But the firsting meant that what I got was an insight into loads of other directors' practices. How firsthand I stood next to a director every day and I watched them work. I watched them work with crews, actors. I watched them visualize and bring their visions to practice. I learned a lot of bad things that I would never do. And I also learned good things. But I would always support those directors. And that experience was invaluable. It was also one of the reasons I got Misfits, because I graduated from film school and they were very nervous about giving me a first block of telly, because they were like, the big thing in telly is, are you able to complete a day? So that's why I think age comes into it in a certain extent, because they want to know you've got the experience to be able to handle the pressures and make sure you have the responsibility to understand that. And when I say completing a day, I mean you have a schedule on a TV drama where you have to shoot 6 scenes that day. It's your responsibility as the director to make sure you achieve that and you deliver that, unless there are things out of your control. I'm doing a lot of talking with my hands, aren't I? Just become very self-conscious of that. And so, yeah, Misfits only gave me that opportunity because I was able to sort of list off, they were able to see, I never had it available, but I used to be a first assistant director and was able to talk to them about that part of my career. And that gave them some sort of grounding and security to know that I understood schedule, I understood the responsibility of the director. And that kind of helped get me over the line on that job, essentially. That was a real sort of load of sorry.
Well, no, it's taking those opportunities, it's learning firsthand and paying attention, right? That's so much of it is about paying attention, and I'm assuming with a first AD, a lot of it obviously is negotiation as much as anything. Communication,
communication and negotiation. But I mean, been any job in this industry, I think, is all about communication. And a lot of communication is listening. And as a first, that's, you have to just listen and know everything. And the way you can know first and foremost is by listening to the conversations around you and having an understanding. And I think as a director, directors sometimes don't listen enough. They and I think sometimes you have to listen. And what I mean by that is they're listening, but are you listening? So there's a lot of times with actors, for example, they'll say stuff to you and something will be bothering them and you'll try and get them to do it still. But sometimes you have to just listen and go, what is the problem here? And get to the bottom of what that problem is.
Now, throughout this conversation, we're going to be showing some clips from some of Lewis's work. And we're going to go right back to the start, not the skateboard videos, but we're going to go with Charlie Says.
Find those, they're buried in a locker somewhere.
When the retrospective comes, someone will find them. We're going to look at Charlie Says, which is the film that you made when you graduated from the National Film and Television School. Could you set the clip up a little bit, please? Could you sort of tell us a little bit about the story and what we're about to see?
So the NFTS is structured in a way where you go for 2 years and you make a series of films. And the great thing about the NFTS is that you make films in such an sort of short window. My first year film was a disaster. You learn from that and immediately you make another film. And it's very rare you have an institution where you can make stuff, learn from it, and then go again. And so you make 3 films at the NFTS. You make first year film a Digi and your grad. And this was my graduation film. So the combination of that learning experience over 2 previous films. And it's based on a lie I told my own parents on a holiday about seeing this man in the woods. When I was very young, I was seeking attention. I got 2 older sisters and was feeling neglected. I think I was younger than the boy in this. And I told a lie that I'd sort of been chased by a homeless man in the woods, and sort of saw how that lie kind of spiraled out of control. And I only thought about the incident when we were trying to find a film to make. And I was sort of thinking about things in my own life and the idea of lying, and then you start thinking and remembering these things you blocked out. And I just remember when I started talking about it, how I remember feeling the shame that my dad knew. There came a point in the lie where I knew my dad knew I was lying, but he'd taken it so far with the manager of this place that they were looking for this person that even he couldn't go, do you know what, let's stop this. I think he's lying. And I remember that. And I remember talking to my dad about it. When I started making the film, I was like, I'm gonna have to have a conversation with my dad at some point. And it's a fictional film. It's like my dad didn't go down doing the stuff that this dad does. But my dad couldn't really remember it. And then the more I went through, the more he sat and pondered it, the more things came back to him. But that's kind of the sort of, the birth of the idea. And it was written by Frances Poletti, who is a great writer, and she made it her own as well and brought so much to the story. So,
thank you. And here is a clip from Charlie Says.
You best be ready, we're coming. Charlie.
You all right?
Yeah.
Why didn't you come get me?
I thought you were busy.
Was he in there?
Yeah.
Right, come on. Everyone back to the lake. Some man's just tried to grab Charlie in the woods.
What?
There's an abandoned van. I reckon he's been sleeping rough. All the kids need to stay by the lake.
No way.
You're more than welcome to go back to your parents.
Rich?
Now, I know the area where he was seen, so I'm going back out to look.
I'll come. I'll get my bits.
Right, Rich, hang on. What happened? What did Charlie say?
Hang on. Nige, I reckon if we go back out to that area, we stand a good chance of catching you.
Right, you are. Sam, stay here, yeah?
What happened, Charlie?
That's what Dad said.
What did he look like?
I don't know.
Were you going into the van or was he coming out to you?
Coming out.
So did you stumble across him, maybe, you know, give him a bit of a fright?
No.
You sure you can't remember what he looked like?
They were hairy.
Okay. Anything else?
No.
What?
Liz, that's enough.
I just think before we go guns blazing, let's just check he isn't getting carried away with himself.
Charlie, are you telling me the truth?
Yeah.
It's all right if you're not. Did everything happen just as you said?
Yeah.
I'm going back out.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
What do you remember about making Charlie Says? What's it like watching it back? And what is that, the memory of that day? What is that?
I mean, I don't really associate the film with the lie I told my own dad, because it became, when you hand it over to a writer, it becomes its own thing, and I sort of disassociate. Maybe when I talk to the actors, there's things I talked about in terms of my own experience, but I very much let it be its own thing. I mean, I hate watching my work back anyway. I mean, we made it like 11 years ago now, so yeah, you just see all your mistakes, don't you, and all the things you hate about it. Yeah, no, it was 11 years. It was during the Olympics. We were filming during the Olympics, and it was Connor Chapman, who plays the boy. It was his first film. He was a non-actor from Bradford. Amy Hubbard, a casting director, found him, and we cast him just before he did The Selfish Giant. So it was the first thing he did. Just literally, we filmed and then he left us, and then he went and did The Selfish Giant. So my experiences of the film are all tied into working with him and trying to get him, because the whole film hangs on him essentially. But the whole experience for me was about trying to craft a performance from someone who's a non-actor who, you know, Connor would do a take and then be like, I'm bored now, you know. So it's like, can we, you know, and he never would learn this. If it felt like school, Connor wasn't interested. So he wouldn't learn lines. So the whole film was wrapped in sort of trying to make the experience work for Connor and to get the performance out of Connor. And he's a brilliant actor. I mean, he must be, he was 13 then, so he's like, in his mid-20s now.
Can I just interrupt? Can I ask about how did you address that working with a non-actor who you say gets bored, has a short attention span?
Well, some of it is you work with the other actors and you sort of give license to the other actors. A lot of what I would say is like, he's not going to hit his marks. He's not going to give you your feed-in lines, and liberating them and saying to them, whatever he does, just respond. I mean, we've cast a kid who's kind of raw and loose, and you just have to kind of go with it. So there are times he misses his lines and they sort of interrogate him, and all that stuff kind of works. So it was about kind of saying to them, you have to help me here. And so it wasn't just my responsibility. I kind of unfairly maybe put it on the cast as well, the older cast. And then, yeah, little things like I never made him learn his lines. Kids are really good. You can give them a scene and then they remember it quite quickly. I find that with kids, if they learn the lines the day before they come in, they can't unlearn them as well. And so it feels like a performance. So with Connor, it never felt like a performance because the reality is it wasn't. I mean, if I did it again, I would have probably filmed on digital, we shot on 35 because sometimes we had to go again because we didn't know if we'd got it sharp because of the technicals of working with film. Whereas with digital, we would have known. And that's some of the problems with Connor is you'd have to do one more than you maybe wanted to do. And then after a couple of setups, he's bored. But we created games as well. We used to play games in between setups, just keep his focus and his energy sort of in the scene. But everyone was amazing.
How long was the shoot for that?
8 days.
Okay.
Which is quite a substantial amount of time for a short film.
This was your graduation film?
My graduation film, yeah.
How was the pressure?
Massive, like crazy. And we screened it here. I remember, like, this is where it screened. And I was the first film up on, there was 8 of us, and I was the first film up. And yeah, it was terrifying. But the pressure of making it as well.
Yeah.
I was talking to the graduates that are about to graduate now, and I was saying the amount of pressure you put on yourself, because the reason you go to film school is to make this film and get an agent, get representation, and the amount of pressure you put on the film when you're making it, you know, is unbearable. And sometimes directors can behave a certain way because the pressure is too much. And part of being a director is learning to manage and cope with pressure, because the pressure never goes away. Every job, there's a new pressure. It's just whatever that pressure is.
What do you think you learned making that film that you still rely on today, that's become part of your style or become part of how you work on a set? Are there things that you learned on that day, on that shoot, that 8 days, that you still have? Yeah,
I mean, I think every job, you learn on every job. Even now, like, you learn so much about the way you want to work, about your voice. I think the thing with that film was I was learning about the kind of films that I'm interested in, the kind of work I want to make. And obviously when I started working in television, a lot of it was, I took the jobs that I could get, but I'm now in a position where I'm starting to pick jobs based on what reflects my interests as a filmmaker. And so now I feel like it's more back to Charlie says, but you learn on every job. There weren't specific things, there would have been lots of things, but it probably would have been around the performances. I worked with a brilliant cinematographer called Alfie Biddle on that. So that relationship and how we worked was very informative. But no, I mean, I can't remember specifics, but it's every job you grow and learn unique things from.
You spoke about the importance of the NFTS in terms of how it allows you to make a film, make mistakes, make another film, you know, and learn from those. Of course, one of the problems with making films is the money.
Yeah.
So how did you go about funding something like this? How did you make?
Well, that's the thing about the NFTS. It's all funded, so you go there and you all have budgets for each of these films. You don't go to the film school and then raise the finance yourself. You pay to go to the film school, and the scholarships and bursaries and everything there. I mean, I have to say, look, this is uniquely my experience. I wrote. This is a bit of a shameless plug now. During lockdown, I wrote a book called Directors Now, where I interviewed 105 directors who are working at the moment and asked them the same 5 questions. And originally, I only asked 20 directors. And it was a gift I was doing for students I was teaching who couldn't make their films because of lockdown. And they were graduating without making anything. So it was a kind of gift to them. And I realized very quickly that the 20 filmmakers I asked all went to the NFTS. And I was like, crap, I need to start talking to other people. And in the end, I sort of, the other 80 filmmakers I asked, lots of them had very different stories. So whilst the NFTS worked for me, there are loads of examples, and there are loads of examples on that website and in that book of, which is all free online. It's ironically financed by the NFTS to put it free, so it's accessible for anybody online. But through those stories, you can see there are many ways to go about forging a career in the industry. The NFTS happened to be the thing I did, because when I graduated from university, I struggled to gain traction and get an agent. Was slowly becoming a first AD, and I had a feature film that I was about to do, which was based on a short I made before film school, and we were waiting for the money to option the book. The writer of the book who'd wrote the short, who was a friend, got private investment, and the private investment came in and said, we'll give you the money if you get rid of the first-time director. So me and the producer were kicked out, and they made the film I'd been working on for 3 years without me. And that was such a point where I was so down about that experience, and I was like, felt like I didn't know how I was going to do it. I still wasn't, and that's when I decided to go and look at the NFTS as an option, as a possible way through this situation I'd found myself in. So it was perfect for me, but there are other people it just wouldn't suit, or it wouldn't work, or it's not right. And if you don't go to the NFTS, it's, ironically, the NFTS, we do masterclasses all the time. And every director that came in there, Christopher Nolan, Edgar Wright, all of them would come in and be like, yeah, well, I didn't get into the NFTS, I applied and they wouldn't have me. And so it's like, there are so many examples of brilliant people out there that didn't go to the NFTS. And I don't want you to think it's kind of the be all and end all, basically. It's a great institution, but it's not the sort of the only way through.
Plenty of other routes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Plenty of other routes. Just before we move on to the second clip, just wondering, Charlie says you're screened here.
Yep.
You got an agent?
Yep.
How soon after the screening?
Well, she'd already seen my Digifilm Echo, and then I went for a couple of meetings, but it was weeks. It was like 3 weeks.
And then after that, Misfits?
Yeah, after that, there was a sort of couple of months for March. We graduated in Feb. I got Misfits in May. I'd just done a music video, and I'd had a lot of meetings. I was trying to get, my thing was I came out of film school, and there's a little bit of snobbery, there still is, or less so now in TV, but when I came out of film school, TV was still sort of the thing that filmmakers wanted to make films. I came out and said, I need to work. And I'm very happy to prove that I can do this to anybody. I knew that no one was going to hand me a really great episode of Black Mirror or whatever coming out of film school. I had to earn the right to get that work. So when I signed with Michelle, I was very much like, I'll go do Doctors, I want to do some stuff to prove, entry-level stuff to prove that I can do this.
Yep.
Doctors wouldn't have me, Hollyoaks no one would have me. They were looking for experienced directors, which was mad because they're the entry-level shows. And I was just really fortunate that, across that period, Misfits was looking for a director, and Michelle put me forward, and I had like 3 or 4 meetings for that job before I got it.
We're going to move on to the second clip.
I don't know what the second clip is, but...
Oh, it's a corker. They all are, to be fair. This clip is from Des, the ITV drama, which examined the crimes and the mind of the serial killer Dennis Nielsen. Nielsen's played by David Tennant. It's an award-winning piece, highly acclaimed. And in this scene, we see Brian Masters, played by Jason Watkins, who will become Nielsen's biographer, meet Nielsen in prison.
Name? Brian Masters to see Dennis Nielsen. Find is okay. You smoke, Brian?
Yes, I do.
You smoke as many real fags in this room as you like, yeah? Out there, you're only allowed tobacco, so. Yeah. They say capital punishment's dead, but Her Majesty manages to find her little ways, you know? Yes. I read your book, Brian. The Dukes. Origin, Ennoblement, and the History of 26 Families. Are you from aristocracy?
No. No, I'm not.
You're from that kind of world, though, eh? I bet you're a bloody Tory.
I'm not sure that's entirely relevant.
I'm not entirely sure of your intentions as of yet. Yeah? Your letters sounded genuine, but now we're sat opposite each other. I worry. I have judged myself more harshly than any casual observer, any court ever could.
Aren't you the one judging me, Mr. Nielsen?
How's that?
Oh, you hear my accent and you assume that you know everything about me.
No, I'm simply stating it's obvious where you come from. It's not a bad thing. I just like to know where I stand with the person I'm talking to.
Well, I was brought up on the Old Kent Road.
You don't sound like you were brought up on the Old Kent Road.
Well, I was lucky. I got an education.
Ah, is that where the accent comes from, is your education, is it?
I was under the impression that I was here to discuss writing a book about you. I'm really not that interesting.
Why would you want to write about a monster like me?
You do consider yourself to be a monster?
Well, have you read the paper?
Of course.
It totally amazes me that people's attraction to the macabre. Because all of us have skeletons rattling around in our cupboards, you know? Secrets they would never dare to tell to anyone. So what comes is this flood of self-righteous public condemnation, whilst simultaneously everybody's talking about it over and over and over. They're consuming it and indulging in it, but at arm's length. Which is all very well, but meanwhile, I'm left here to rot, whilst others make profits at my expense.
Well, listen, if you want some money from this, I'm sure that we can come to some arrangement.
I don't want a penny for any. I just don't want those poor men exploited.
Two acting heavyweights there, engaged in a game of chess. Can you tell us a little bit about the composition of that scene, the creation of that scene? Because there's a tangible mood, an atmosphere in it.
We kind of cheated in some ways because it's a real event that happened. So we had the book, we had access to Brian Masters. Myself and Luke had spoke to Brian about what that was. The unique thing about this was that Brian Masters managed to get access to Nielsen. So he's waiting for trial, and somehow the Home Office had missed the letter because Brian wrote books about aristocracy and kings and queens of old. They didn't see him as someone that was trying to reach out to Nielsen to write a book. So he kind of went under the radar from the Home Office, was able to meet Nielsen. So he hasn't even started having trial. They're still building the evidence and case around him. So Brian was meeting Nielsen literally throughout the whole of the pre-trial and trial. So he was getting this unique insight into what Nielsen had done before, you know, it became public knowledge and before the police. And then the police obviously became aware of him, and it became a thing that they had to negotiate and navigate themselves. So the scene really is about ego. You know, one of the things we wanted to do with this show was when people talk, it always surprises me. We had people come to set and they got hold of the production because they were friends of Dennis Nielsen, and me and David went and met them. It was really weird. They basically had met, after the Nielsen had been convicted years later, he'd read the book Killing for Company, and he said he felt sorry for Nielsen. Now, I don't know anybody that can read Killing for Company, which is essentially a book about how Dennis Nielsen took the lives of all of these desperate men and killed them, and what he did, and sort of all of the things that went into that, and come out of it feeling sorry for Nielsen. Now, Nielsen is very good at writing. The way he writes is very poetic, and he writes about loneliness and isolation, but he's still a serial killer that killed innocent men. And this guy had a correspondence with Nielsen and became his friend and introduced his wife to him. Anyway, really normal couple. And they said they don't tell many people they were friends with him because people judge them. And I was sitting there kind of going, okay. But what that showed you is that Nielsen created this sense of, he made people feel sorry for him. For example, they called him the kindly killer. Like, who killed someone that kills that many, 13 people, the kindly killer? So one of the things we wanted to do was show how, so through Brian, through the letters, through all the access we had, you just realize that he's just a huge narcissist, egotistical narcissist that wanted to control the narrative. And so some of what we tried to do in this scene where this is where he lets his guard down with someone, you start to really see the performance of Nielsen, because with the police, he was very honest and guarded, but here's where you start to see he's enjoying this. This is his opportunity, to tell the story. So what you've kind of got is these two people both trying to navigate each other and figure each other out. But I can't take any credit for that. We cast really well, and I got the hell out of their way and let them do what they did, which is,
Was that literally what you did? You just got out of their way? David
yes. In certain aspects, yeah. David is phenomenal. I've worked with David a few times. That was my first time working with Jason. They turned up there really prepped, and you just we shot 2 cameras so that we didn't have to do it again and again, and we created an environment and a space where they could just do their thing. And I didn't have to get involved that much. I got
notes?
Maybe very rarely, but more of a let's just push this moment. Let's, but no, they're brilliant. It was funny, the writer, me and Luke decided to adapt it together. And me and Luke came to set that day, and we just sit behind the monitor, both just riveted, watching it like an audience member, because it's essentially, I always said Des could have been a play. It's essentially a series of two-handers about trying to understand the mind of a serial killer and whether that serial killer is mad or bad, which is kind of what it all came down to in the court. So it was fascinating to watch. But I don't watch that scene and see any of my own work. What I see is 2 brilliant actors who I was just really fortunate enough to have worked with, doing great work.
You mentioned there that you co-created the series. Is that?
Yeah, I always feel weird about that. Yeah, I always feel weird about saying no, because we didn't
own it.
No, because we didn't create it. It's a true story. We adapted it, and I always had this thing that whereas Luke would say we created it, I would say we adapted it. In that Luke brought me the idea of doing it, and then we decided that's what we do, and it took us 5 years to get it made from sort of the idea of doing it to finally sort of being on set.
So you had a greater investment in it, in this co-adaptation,
it was
than other projects.
Yeah.
So how was that? How did that affect your approach to directing or to telling that story? Was it harder because you had so much investment in it?
Yeah, I think that I put more pressure on myself. I felt like I could be a bit of a sport brat sometimes on this job, in that I was very much, 5 years it took us to make it. There were certain times people would say, we can't afford to do that, or we can't do this. And I would very much sometimes be like, well, I need to do this. So how do we do this? How do we facilitate this? So there were times I'd push back maybe more than I would on other jobs, because part of me was like, I've waited so long to make this. I'd prefer to wait longer and make it the way we want to make it than compromise on it. We worked with a really great company that helped us, but sometimes so what it meant was I had to be let in to the finances of the show, because I had to really help get what was important to me and Luke on screen. And David. David was on this journey with us from the very start. We decided we were going to do it. Luke wrote a script, and I was working with David on Broadchurch at the time, and Luke got the script to David, because there was a sort of weird thing where I didn't know him that well to sort of give him a script. So Luke sent it to his wife, who he knew. And then David came up to me at the read for, I'd never met him before, and he sort of walked up to me and went, "You're Lewis?" And I went, "Yeah." And he went, "I've read Des." And I was like, "Oh, great." And so that was a great in for me with David. And then we did Broadchurch together. And at the end of Broadchurch, he just said, "Look, whatever you need, I really want to do it with you guys." And so David was on that journey with us for the 5 years and gave script notes. He championed us. He's the reason we got it made. Let's be realistic. I think a Nielsen project without David would never have come to screen, but the fact it was David doing Dennis Nielsen, I think, was what made it commissionable.
So you really couldn't give him notes then, could you? Because he basically helped you get this to screen.
Look, I've worked with David, like I said, I've worked with David before, and I don't think I gave him any notes on Broadchurch either. He's so great. My job really is to remind him where we're at in the story, if anything,
You mentioned there, of course, about Nielsen's crimes, which I thought was artfully navigated in the first episode, where Danny Mays, who plays a detective, sees a pot on the stove, which I think is on, and he goes to lift the lid, and another copper says, don't look in there. And so, it's there, but it's not there. So with something like this, how difficult was it to navigate that tone? How hard was it to tread the line between telling enough and not telling too much?
It wasn't, it was, I think what Luke had done, and I think credit to Luke, the writer, I think what Luke did when he first came to him is, his thing was like, and people had tried to make a Nielsen film for years. David was ironically attached to do a film that fell apart. I think many people had tried to tell this in various forms and not being able to do it. And what Luke did, and this is all Luke, this is Luke's brilliance really, Luke sort of set the story at the point where he's arrested. So most people did what the Jeffrey Dahmer series just did, which is they were trying to show the murders. And Luke was like, the only person that knows what happened in those rooms in the case of Nielsen is Nielsen and the person he's killed. So it's unfair to take what he says as gospel. Mm-hmm. And also it's not fair on the families to show that, and that's not interesting. What was interesting for us was he gets caught and no one knows he's been doing this. And he's only caught because he calls the drain company himself because he's blocked the drain with flushing human remains. Mm. So he almost inevitably kind of catches himself. And then it's the community realizing, it's us realizing, how have we allowed this man to kill for so long, to do this for so long? So that's what it became about, which was what was interesting for us. And when you know that's your story, we know we can't show things. We don't want to show things. And actually it became more about Nielsen telling these stories and whether the audience believe him or not. And that became the kind of the piece and how the piece was structured. So it never was a problem because we knew we never wanted to tell that story or for it to be grotesque or to be, what's grotesque is the words that are coming out of Nielsen's mouth. But by the end of the show, we kind of present him to be an unreliable narrator. But we never wanted to show anything. So it wasn't a problem because I knew I was never going to see inside that pot. And ironically, when we shot that scene, we were unsure whether we were going to use that scene because even that scene felt, is that too gratuitous? But the reality is we needed to show the audience at the levels of depravity that Nielsen was going to once he'd killed. It wasn't a case of killing. He was boiling heads and cutting up bodies and keeping them under floorboards and sleeping next to them and stuff, all sorts of weird things.
For the final clip, we have Time, which is another award-winning drama starring Sean Bean as a teacher who's sent to prison for drunk driving and for killing a man. It also stars Stephen Graham, who plays a prison warder who is blackmailed into smuggling drugs into his own prison. Thank you. Here we have a clip of Graham's character being sentenced.
Your Honour, I can't give you his name. You know, he's in jail. And yet he can order men 200 miles away in another jail to batter me son. And if I give you his name, then it'll just happen again. Now, you told me if I don't name his name, then, you know, I'll get a longer sentence. But I was prepared to smuggle drugs into my own prison to protect my son. You know, me, an officer, 22 years, impeccable service, smuggling drugs into his own nick. And if I was prepared to do that, to protect our son, then I'm more than ready to do another year or so for him, Your Honour.
Consideration will be given to your impeccable career and the full 1/3 discount for your guilty plea, but in all the circumstances, that is all that can be offered. Eric McNally, you will go to prison for 4 years. Take him down, please.
Down. There was no way we weren't going down. We were going down for class me. Oh, listen, I went into that box down for me sake. Yeah. And that's why you went in the box. That's why you went in the box. They were saying you were doing the dance where there was no way in the end.
On time, please.
We don't have too long, I'm afraid, so I'm gonna have to rush you on a little bit on this one. Just a breezy question. What makes a good director?
What makes a good director? Oh, God. I think the older I get, I think it's the ability to surround yourself with brilliant people. I think a lot of my work is the the achievements and successes of all of the people I work with, and that's actors, that's crew. You know, if you're a director, the best thing you can do is have a really good radar for talent and employ that talent, and they'll improve your work. And I think directing, yes, there's lots of things you need to do and know, but if you surround yourself with really good people, that is the best thing any director can do, because then you can rely on people who are experienced, brilliant, creative, talented, and so you're not on your own. Whereas I think if you surround yourself with less people, or people who are, you know, maybe less experienced or whatever, then that can be where you might have to do more in that area. So for me, you know, one of my strengths, I think, is recognizing brilliant crew members and basically begging them to work with me. Yeah.
And just wondering, what attracted you to Time? I mean, apart from Jim McGovern, apart from Steve.
Well, ironically, the film that I got kicked off when I was 25 was a prison film. So I basically spent years, I'm going to be quick now, spent years working on a prison film, never got to make it. And the producer I'd worked with before, the exec producer I'd worked with before on a thing called Prey, and he called me and said, I'm doing a prison thing with Jimmy McGovern. And he knew about he'd saw Stained, he knew about what happened with the film. And he was like, are you interested? And I wasn't able to do it because we were doing Des. And then COVID happened, they had to push, and it all fell into place. But it was like, it felt serendipitous. It felt like I'd come full circle, if that makes sense, from this huge setback to telling a film and been in a world that I knew inside out from the years of research in my early 20s.
And just wondering, I mean, you know, COVID knocking schedules aside, how do you choose your projects rather?
It changes. I've got a young family now, so that obviously plays a part in terms of if there was an okay script far away, I might not be that interested. If I was going to be away from the girls, it would have to be a project that I had to do. But generally, it's about script. Every time I try to think about other things, like what's the budget, what's this, who's in it, I always end up just losing myself. So I generally just read the script, don't ask myself any of those kind of questions. And do I think the material, do I respond to the material? Does it speak to me? And do I think I can do something? You're always looking for something to hang your hat on, which sounds stupid because I wear hats. But what I mean by that is I'm always looking in scripts for stuff that I can get excited by. And they might not be the same things that other people get excited by. But if I'm going to be on something for so long, I need to know it's something I can carry with me.
And are you able to say what you're currently working on and what's coming up?
Yeah, I'm just in the edit on 7 hours. So I've just done 7 episodes of a piece called The Long Shadow, written by George Kay, which is essentially about the 5-year period that Peter Sutcliffe was actively committing the murders in Yorkshire. But really it looks at the families, the communities, the victims, and how the police failed that community, essentially.
7 hours is quite a lot.
It's a hell of a lot. Yeah, I can understand now why not many people do it, because you're juggling so much. Yeah, we're in the edit right now, but I'm also grading, mixing, ADRing. So it's, yeah, again, relying on people around you who are brilliant to prop you up.
How many jobs do you think you're doing like, per episode then? Do you think simultaneously in terms of like grading, mixing, all
Well, at the moment, probably about, ADR, I'm editing. I'm supervising, as a director, you're over everything. So it's like everything in post-production right now is happening. I'm signing off music, signing off track lays, giving notes to grades and sitting in on grades. We haven't started mixing yet, but there's like loads of stuff basically. But it's about time management. And like I said, you surround yourself with great people and they prop you up.
Lewis, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your advice and for giving us great insight into your critically acclaimed and popular works. Thank you so much, Lewis Arnold.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lewis.